I'm Dwight Drummond. Tonight, relief for fully vaccinated Canadians returning home.
I'm going to visit my parents, who are also fully vaccinated, and we're just excited to be able to hug them.
It's a slow return to normal as quarantine rules are lifted, but non-essential travel remains off limits. Plus,
we go out and find a nice shady spot, sit down, get some food, and enjoy the weather as it is.
scorching temps in the GTA. Toronto opens up cooling centers as the city issues another heat warning. And
give them a chance and an opportunity to be back home.
I think it'd be great. It's summertime. We're enjoying nice weather. It'd be great to have the dome open.
the boys of summer could be back. The Jays' proposal to return to Rogers Centre. First tonight, starting today, fully vaccinated Canadians and permanent residents returning to Canada will see a big change at the border. No more quarantine requirement if they meet certain conditions. This narrow reopening is seen as a first step toward a broader easing of travel restrictions. Sanjay Maru has the details.
I feel relieved knowing that I can just come and I don't have to quarantine.
Since the start of this pandemic, Hassan Bandia has been unable to see his family in Canada, whether it be due to changing jobs in different U.S. cities or mandatory quarantine requirements. But now he's in Chicago, less than 5 hours from his family in Comber, Ontario, and the relaxed rules mean more freedom to see his parents.
Definitely makes my decision making a lot easier.
As of today, Bandia is allowed to enter Canada without having to quarantine, but not everyone can do so. Just Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and anyone else already eligible to enter. To qualify, you need to have received a vaccine approved in Canada. The second dose, or a single dose of Johnson & Johnson, has to be administered 14 days prior to arrival at the border. You need to show proof of vaccination through the ArriveCan app or website, plus a negative COVID test both before and upon arrival, which must be less than 3 days old.
Before, all we talked about was COVID risk, but now that we've been able to defang the virus with vaccines, these vaccines are wonderful, we can now bring in a risk trade-off.
This infectious disease physician says easing border restrictions makes sense now more than ever, pointing to rising vaccination rates.
And we now know that bringing in travelers is going to be able to be done because the illness is not as severe.
Currently, restrictions on non-essential travel between the Canada-U.S. border are set to expire July 21st. But until then, the Ontario government says it's going to coordinate with Ottawa when it comes to a full reopening plan.
We're working closely with the federal government, and we'll take a look at it when it rolls around on July the 21st. So let's all work together and let's do everything we can to get things back to normal.
And for those living across the border with family here, they're eager for a full reopening. In the meantime, today's lifting of some restrictions is seen as a cautious approach toward just that.
That's a huge barrier that's been taken away, where we can kind of finally get back to a normal life pre-pandemic.
Sanjay Maru, CBC News, Windsor.
No more paying for a quarantine hotel. We met up with a few people coming into Pearson Airport today. Asked them if the changes affected their travel plans.
We're going to visit my parents, who are also fully vaccinated, and we're just excited to be able to hug them. We've been waiting for the hotel requirement to be dropped so that we can enter Canada without having to stay in a hotel. And we're Canadian, which means this is home, so we're very happy to be able to come back after being gone for more than a year.
It's really nice not to have to quarantine or anything right when I'm coming back.
I have, over the last year, I've had to quarantine a couple of times. It seems the rules change. It seems every trip it's a bit different. So this has been the easiest for the last year and a half.
This is the first day that we don't have to go for quarantine, so I picked a date on purpose, to avoid quarantine.
Actually, I changed my flight. I was in Ukraine working with orphans, and then I realized it was going to be cheaper to change my flight and wait to come today, and it was smooth. They let me through.
I haven't been back to Canada for over a year, but it's still a challenging process to get through. Well, you have to have all kinds of tests and answer all kinds of questions, and I guess it's exhausting still. It's not as easy as the borders are open.
Premier Doug Ford this morning said he's going to be cautious about reopening the province further, adding he will be following the lead set by his health officials.
And we're just going to follow their guidelines. They're the experts, And we're just going to work day in and day out, number one, to get every single business open in this province, get them back on their feet, but we're going to do it cautiously too.
Ford suggested that Ontario will stick with the current timeline laid out by the Chief Medical Officer of Health, which means moving into Step 3 21 days after Step 2 at the earliest. When asked about what would happen after Step 3, Ford said those plans would be unveiled shortly over the next 3 weeks. Ontario logged its fewest number of new COVID cases in nearly 10 months today. The province is reporting 170 new cases, a number Ontario hasn't seen since September 10th. The province is also reporting 1 new death. Toronto has 27 of those cases. Peel has 8. The region of Waterloo continues to record the highest number of cases in the province at 34. Ontario recorded a positivity rate of 1.3%, with the 7-day average of daily cases falling to 210. How's this for a milestone? More than 50% of all adults in Toronto are now fully vaccinated. The city reached that mark today. It's encouraging news, but there's a fairly large chunk of people without any protection against COVID at all. Chris Glover explains why that's a problem and what's being done to get more people vaccinated.
It doesn't get easier for you than this. A doctor at your door with a COVID vaccine in a cooler.
This work is very laborious. You can spend a whole day driving around the city and vaccinate 10 people as one vaccinated.
Dr. Nathan Stahl helped at the Scotiabank Arena Clinic last month that vaccinated 26,000 people in one shot. This door-to-door approach takes longer, but for homebound and hesitant people, it's an important mission.
For someone who, went into this with legitimate hesitancy, and even people who were not intending to get vaccinated, I find that sort of work and those actual shots into arms the most rewarding.
More than 50% of Toronto adults are now fully vaccinated, and roughly 77% have 1 dose.
Which we always knew, this last sort of 25% are going to be the hardest to reach. It's going to require, I think, more efforts like this.
This area in the Davis
Dr. Stahl is collaborating with Councillor Josh Matlow, identifying those unvaccinated in their Midtown ward.
Sometimes we have a few doses left in the vial, and we've even been known to go out onto the street, into a parking lot, and find people.
It's the kind of intimate vaccination experience the Health Common Solutions Lab at Sinai Health says will be critical.
What sits underneath, or what lies underneath that hesitancy to get vaccinated, is often a history of trauma or fear in a community. Communities that have had bad experiences with governments.
The executive director says initiatives like community vaccine ambassadors are also helping.
Hearing that this is safe and that it makes sense to do from another person who has a similar background and also has had that same experience generationally is a very powerful way to encourage people to get access to the vaccine.
And while vaccine access has improved for poor and racialized communities hit hard by the pandemic, the more affluent Kingsway South neighborhood has the highest percentage of adults fully vaccinated at 60%, whereas the lower income neighborhood of Jamestown has the lowest at just 30%.
We have a big push on in the northwest corner of the city where vaccination rates are lower than we need them to be.
And with the Delta variant in particular threatening COVID surges in unvaccinated pockets, the doctor house call may be worth the time it takes. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
The Premier's office is clarifying comments made by Ford this morning, guaranteeing the pandemic pay bump for personal support workers will be permanent.
We're the first government to come along and say that they deserve more money. I've said it publicly. We gave them a $3 an hour bump in pay. We're going to make sure we make that 100%. I know it was temporary, but they're going to have a $3 increase in pay.
Ford's office told CBC that he is committed to making the pay raise permanent, but there's still a lot of work to do, adding that it's easier said than done. The $3 an hour boost is set to expire on August 23rd. A memorial table has been set up outside of 52 Division headquarters, honoring the life of Constable Jeffrey Northup, who was killed in the line of duty last week. Police say Northup was intentionally struck by a vehicle while responding to a call in the parking garage located underneath Toronto City Hall on Friday night. His partner was also hurt, but her injuries were non-life-threatening. 31-year-old Umar Zamir will appear in court on Friday. He's been charged with first-degree murder. A 61-year-old motorcyclist is in critical condition after a crash in Mississauga.
It is very, very early in this investigation, so our investigators from the Major Collision Bureau will be working to gather as much pieces of evidence as they can, and from there they'll be able to determine the exact sequence of events that led to this event occurring.
The collision happened near Dundas Street in Cedar Glen Gate just before 12:30 p.m. The Oakville man was rushed to a trauma center with life-threatening injuries. Police say the occupants of the vehicle involved stayed on scene and are cooperating with investigators. Anyone with information or dash cam footage is asked to reach out to police. It's been nearly 2 weeks since police moved in on Trinity Bellwoods Park to clear the encampment, resulting in clashes between advocates and officers. But the park is still not fully open to the public. Ali Shiasan joins us live now from Trinity Bellwoods. Ali, what is the park like now?
Well, Dwight, as you can see behind me, the fence is still here. There are security guards as well who are walking back and forth inside that perimeter that is enclosed. It's hard to believe that it's been 2 weeks already since we've seen protesters and police clash. And since we are reflecting now, I wanted to ask the city if they would do anything different next time. Have a listen. Gone are the riot cops, mounted police, protesters, and chaos. But 2 weeks on, remnants of the park eviction remain. The fence is still cordoning off a large section of the park, manned by private security.
It's not the best ambiance, no.
I think they really want to invisibilize homelessness, and instead of actually providing a solution, they're just blocking off the public spaces where they don't want homeless people.
City spokesperson Brad Ross says it's to allow remediation work to be done.
We want to get the lawn and the grass back in shape, and so it has been seeded. It needs a few weeks to take hold, and then the fencing will come down after a few more weeks.
City crews had been cleaning up sections where waste had been collecting.
Thousands of needles that we collected at Trinity Bellwoods Park, for example, and propane tanks and gasoline cans and other public safety dangers or risks.
There are other encampments at parks throughout the city. The evictions themselves become risks to public safety. There was Lamport Stadium in May, Trinity Bellwoods 2 weeks ago. And knowing the city continues to issue trespass warnings, I asked if and how they would do things differently.
Reflecting back, again, 14 people were housed. If we weren't met with protesters, there wouldn't be a need for policing. We would, be able to engage with people as we have been doing throughout the pandemic, and will continue to throughout the summer. When we do enforce the next trespass notice in a park, we remain incredibly hopeful that this will happen peacefully.
I reached out to some of the encampment defenders, so to speak, some of the outreach workers who were here 2 weeks ago. They weren't available for media today. Now, I also asked city spokesperson Brad Ross about the cost of all this, and he says they're still tallying it. Dwight.
Thank you, Ali.
You got it.
The Toronto Blue Jays are making a push to return home to the Rogers Centre. I'm Greg Ross. Coming up, I'll tell you what obstacles are standing in their way.
The city is opening 8 cooling centers to help people escape the heat.
If you can find shade, you can find shade. That's good. And limit your activity.
Toronto is under a heat warning. Most of the emergency cooling centers will operate from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. except for Metro Hall downtown, which will be open 24 hours a day during the heat warning. 2 outreach teams will also be checking in on vulnerable people. The city is reminding us to stay hydrated, protect pets, and avoid the sun when possible. All very good advice right now, Colin.
Oh, it sure is. Really makes it tough when we're not only talking about this kind of heat, but also the air quality's been poor. So that can be really difficult for people with any kind of respiratory issues, as we know. So we have to take this all very seriously, especially when you've got temperatures that look like these, all right? 31 now in Toronto, rounding it up a tiny bit, but I mean just a tiny bit. Mississauga 31 as well, St. Catharines 30 degrees at the moment. And then we go from there and we have to talk about what's happening in terms of of how does it really feel. So you take the dew points into consideration. Whenever I talk about these and I say they're into the 20s, you know it's soupy, the air that is in place. And so that's where we get numbers like this for our Humidex values, actually in the low 40s, 41 for Toronto and Mississauga at the moment as well. So there's the heat advisories, warnings that are in place all the way back into southwestern Ontario. But the other thing, with the warm front kind of draped through cottage country, that's been brewing with this very buoyant air. Yeah, thunderstorms. So watches for yellow, but all these areas here in red into severe thunderstorm warnings. And you can see, look at all those lightning strikes. We go in for a closer look. Very active this evening. Now, a few of these, not as strong, will make their way, just a few, later on overnight tonight into the GTA. So I'm going to talk more about that with our forecast coming up, Dwight.
We will check back with you in a bit. Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
Weather is brought to you by Train. To cool and clean the air in your home, it's hard to stop a train. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
A sure sign of summer, Toronto camps welcoming back children for the first day of Camp TO in the city.
These take on even greater importance than ever before because of the tough times that kids have been through with COVID.
More than 4,000 campers are back today. Up to 31,000 children ages 4 to 12 have been registered for the summer. The mayor says there are still spots available. Two Toronto sports teams are asking the feds to let them play at home this summer. Both the Jays and Toronto FC have been forced to play home games in the U.S. because of the pandemic. Greg Ross joins us live now from Rogers Centre, which is usually the home of our Jays. Greg, what is the likelihood of the Jays getting back there anytime soon?
Well, Dwight, the Blue Jays say things are looking really good right now. They're very confident that this could happen, and it's because of things like the city opening up around us, the fact that vaccination rates are really high right now, and they say they have plenty of support when it comes to returning home, but ultimately this is a decision that's going to be made by the federal government.
And he hits the ball hard to right center field. Do you believe it?
It's one of the most promising young lineups the Blue Jays have had in years.
2-2 to Davis.
But so far, most Jays fans have had to watch from a distance. Today, the possibility of the Blue Jays returning home to Toronto had fans buzzing.
You see the boys in blue play, just kind of to be a bit of that distraction and, you know, kind of looking at the light at the end of the tunnel toward this whole COVID thing.
We're enjoying nice weather. It'd be great to have the dome open, watch the Jays, you know, toss the ball around, have some beers, like I said, with the boys, and yeah, enjoy a good time.
Today, the Jays confirmed they are indeed pushing to make that happen sooner rather than later. In a statement, a spokesperson for the team said the Blue Jays have submitted a proposal to the federal government on a return to Toronto after receiving support from the city and province. We continue to push towards our goal of coming home to our fans at Rogers Centre this summer. The Blue Jays have proposed July 30th as a possible return date. That is when they are scheduled to begin a 10-game homestand. While the Jays' return is still up in the air, another Toronto team has confirmed they are coming home, at least for now.
Yeah, we're returning on Thursday.
Yesterday, TFC President Bill Manning confirmed his team will come to Toronto to train, which is permitted under COVID regulations. He's also hoping to get the go-ahead to resume playing in Toronto before July 17th, which is when the team's next home game is scheduled.
We're still in some discussions there, but it seems, you know, everything seems to be headed in the right direction, and so hopefully we'll have some good news on that end soon.
3-2 pitch.
If both teams get permission to resume playing at home, the next question will be whether or not fans will be allowed in to watch them play.
Nothing is like being in front of your own home crowd, so hopefully we'll get some fans in the stands.
We'd love to go watch a game.
You want to really get out and enjoy the things that you really didn't get a chance to before.
Bill Manning says that TFC does have another plan in place if they're not able to get permission for July 17th. He wouldn't say what that plan is, but he did say they won't be returning to Orlando where they have been playing their home games. The other option for the Blue Jays, if they're not able to come back here and play here at the Rogers Centre on July 30th, will be to continue playing their games in Buffalo at Salem Field, Dwight.
Bring our teams home already. All right, thank you, Greg. Porter Airlines is officially returning to the skies. Starting September 8th, flights will be going out and coming into Billy Bishop Airport. After about 18 months of being shut down, the airline will be returning in phases. There will be flights from Ottawa, Montreal, and Thunder Bay the first week, and flights out of Boston, New York, Chicago, and Washington the following week. Porter says approximately 500 employees will be recalled as the first phase of flights are introduced, with more staff being added as more destinations return to the schedule. WestJet received praise last year for issuing refunds to customers for flights canceled during the pandemic, but now many travelers are complaining that isn't happening anymore. They say the airline is rescheduling or rerouting flights in ways that simply don't work for them. Diane Buckner explains.
Shani Couture wants to take her children to visit her sister in Edmonton. She booked a direct flight from Montreal with WestJet. But 2 weeks later, she was notified the family had to take 2 flights and connect through Toronto.
If it was just maybe me and my husband, maybe we could have been accommodated. But with kids, it was absolutely not.
She asked for a refund and was told that wasn't possible.
The only thing they could do was to give me a WestJet credit for a future flight.
When you called customer service, it said your wait time is greater than 12 hours.
Derek Muller had a similar situation when he bought a ticket for his mother to fly direct from Vancouver to visit him in Los Angeles.
The alternative itinerary that they booked us on was the day before at 6 a.m. flying via Calgary. So it was like an additional 3 hours.
Dozens of customers across Canada are complaining on social media about poor service from WestJet.
That was maybe understandable a year ago when we were in the throes of COVID.
This consumer advocate says Canada's Passenger Bill of Rights says WestJet is required to offer refunds for flights it chooses to cancel.
It's up to the senior management at the carriers as well as the government to make clear to everybody in the industry what the rules of the game are now.
WestJet declined an interview request, but apologized to customers in this statement to CBC, saying it is optimistic that these schedule modifications will become less frequent. And after hearing from CBC News, the airline now says it will give refunds to both Shani Couture and Derek Muller.
It's sad that it took this to get reimbursed. The people that don't say anything, do they get reimbursed?
As for all the other dissatisfied customers, no word on whether they'll get their money back. Diane Buckner, CBC News, Toronto.
We have an update now to a story we brought you last week about a former Toronto police officer, Ralph Thistle, and his battle to get paid 15 years of lost wages. He was living in poverty in a rural cabin with no running water. Well, he has finally been paid. John Lancaster has the details.
I feel WSIB is chewing on my soul.
Despite being owed hundreds of thousands of dollars from Ontario's Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, Ralph Thistle has been living in a small cabin near Mount Forest with his service dog Rupert and no running water. The former Toronto police officer's career was cut short due to PTSD. More than 9 months ago, WSIB was ordered to pay him 15 years of back pay, but still hadn't. Days after CBC News began looking into the delay, the money suddenly landed in his mailbox, he says.
On the flyers, I could see checks from WSIB. And then I went numb.
Inside those envelopes, checks adding up to $630,000. The money covers the after-tax wages Thistle could have made between 2007, when he resigned, and next year, when he could have retired. In 2007, he was a 29-year veteran cop suffering from PTSD. He resigned just months shy of being eligible for a pension. Until now, he'd been relying on the generosity of family, friends, and his Indigenous community to get by. And driving 46 kilometers return to get drinkable water, he says his priority is to get a well and running water.
That thought alone that it's coming is such a great relief.
But the money is also bittersweet, he says.
Yeah, I feel vindicated. My family and I, who also suffered with trauma through this journey, I feel vindicated, but like I said to my daughters as I chatted with them, the money's great. I still have PTSD. That I'll have for the rest of my life.
John Lancaster, CBC News, Toronto.
As of today, all children 12 to 17 are eligible for their second vaccine dose. It's part of the plan to ensure schools will be safer come fall. But it has some wondering what the plan will be for the schools come September. Lorena Redekop has details on that.
Some 12 to 17-year-olds joined this vaccine lineup in Thorncliffe Park today, here for their second dose. More than 58% of that age group now have dose 1.
When school comes back, I just want to learn in person because online you can't really communicate well.
I think it's good to get them vaccinated before school starts, especially.
But for the younger kids, that's not an option. Vaccines have yet to be approved in Canada for anyone under 12. For some of them, learning from home hasn't been easy.
Last year, day 2, I cried because I really wanted to see my teacher.
You did? You cried because you wanted to see your teacher?
Yeah. Terrible. I probably played games during the time.
Did you think you learned enough?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a bit nervous going into 4th grade.
The education minister has said he wants all kids back in classrooms in fall, and that the chief medical officer will be giving his advice on that in the next few weeks.
We will provide that to parents with the intention of restoring extracurriculars, sports, clubs, and a more social, interactive, yet continuing to be safe learning experience.
He says the province has spent $450 million on school ventilation, supporting more than 1,000 different schools. The Toronto District School Board says there are 170 different projects underway this summer to improve ventilation systems in schools, but it's not happening at some of the older schools.
I'd love to see improved filtration. We still have many buildings where windows don't open or windows are the only source of ventilation.
Both the Liberals and NDP want class size limits in the fall.
Probably if our desks were more separated, because in grade 4, literally our desks were like arms apart, and so we touched each other, and so it was very uncomfortable.
Whatever the government puts in place, it's not easy to enforce everything.
Most of my class, they just hug each other, and like when people try to hug me, I'm just like, no.
Lorena Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
8 people, including a 12-year-old boy, have been charged after fireworks were shot at people at Woodbine Beach this long weekend.
Quite literally had a situation where people were shooting those fireworks, shooting Roman candles, as it were, at police horses, at police officers, and at each other. None of which makes any sense, none of which, of course, is safe or legal, and it is just nonsensical behavior that we're going to have to review yet again and find out what to do about that.
People shooting fireworks illegally has become a constant danger and nuisance for area residents, the city, and police. Social media videos from many weekends this summer show people firing them on the beach at other people. The city said they deployed extra resources to deter that, but it clearly didn't have the intended effect. And to underscore just how dangerous those fireworks can be, the NHL is mourning the death of a goalie for the Columbus Blue Jackets who was involved in a tragic accident celebrating the 4th of July. 24-year-old Matisse Kavlianesk died of chest trauma after being hit by a blast of fireworks in Michigan. He was in a hot tub with a group of people when the fireworks began shooting off by mistake. Paramedics pronounced him dead on scene. The Latvian player was seen as a possible number 2 goalie for the team next season. It may not have been fireworks, but officials in British Columbia say a deadly wildfire that destroyed most of the small town was caused by humans. BC's wildfire service suspects the fire came from within the town of Lytton, but the specific cause has yet to be determined. Renee Filipponi has more.
Smoke continues to hang over vast areas of BC as wildfire danger in the province persists. It's another very busy day for firefighters. North of Lillooet, the McKay fire burns out of control. Evacuation orders and alerts have been issued for small communities near the fire. So far, Lillooet is safe. But the town is prepared, worried the total destruction of Lytton last week could happen to them.
When we saw what happened to our fellow community, the amount of angst, the amount of shock, and the amount of disbelief, and it still remains partly today, and we have to overcome that and begin to look after ourselves.
Right now, there are nearly 200 fires burning across the province, with a dozen considered fires of note or concern. 93 out-of-province crew are on their way to help.
They'll be arriving today out of Abbotsford, and the specifics of whereabouts they'll be deployed, those conversations are still being had, and it's a very dynamic situation.
These are photos from inside burned-out Lytton, where 2 people died. The town is blocked off by the RCMP while an investigation is underway. But the BC Wildfire Service believes it was human-caused.
Ultimately, I know that the truth is going to come out as long as people are, share what they saw, because there's a lot of witnesses to what was there. But certainly it's very, very frustrating for the locals.
There's speculation it was sparked by a train, but that has not been confirmed and is under investigation. And even more help is on the way. 300 military personnel and a number of aircraft are being gathered to assist with this fire season that right now is early on and already very serious. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Vancouver.
The wildfires raging in BC are a stark reminder of how rural and remote communities can feel the first-hand effects of climate change. A major report is calling on governments and businesses to step up and do more to help those parts of our country adapt. David Thurton explains.
A new government report says that climate change is and will have a significant impact on this often forgotten part of Canada. Yes, we are talking about wildfires and flash flooding, but we're also talking about things such as drought and invasive species. These changes in our environment, the report says, will and are having an impact on hunters, trappers, farmers, and fishermen.
I'm extremely worried about the impacts that climate change is having and will have. It's compounding other challenges that these communities are facing.
So these changes are impacting their communities, their economies, and it could have ripple effects, researchers say, on the rest of Canada.
The vulnerability of rural and remote communities is a national economic issue, because the health of rural and remote Canada will affect the overall economic well-being of Canada.
Here's an example. Consider the communities that are the food basket of Canada and the world. Disruptions there not only impact those local regions, but the rest of this country and abroad. The good news, researchers say, is that traditionally, rural, remote, and Indigenous communities are very resilient. They have been through a lot in the past, and there's no reason to believe that they won't adapt to this changing climate that we're in. But they do need the help of the public and private sectors. David Thurton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Tropical storm Elsa is strengthening and picking up speed as it moves across the Caribbean. The storm currently has sustained winds of close to 85 kilometers an hour. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says the tropical storm is moving over western Cuba today. The storm is then expected to pass near the Florida Keys early tomorrow. And that's heading towards our direction, Colin.
Yeah, it's going to be moving up the eastern seaboard, hugging a little closer to the seaboard. But yes, we will be looking at that. And at the moment, you've been seeing the images there. We know it's had an impact on Barbados, Puerto Rico, even some flash flooding in Kingston, Jamaica. And at the moment, it is having an impact on western Cuba as it is moving over that area. And some of the amounts here, the rainfall amounts, are exceeding even 150 millimeters. That can be anticipated, not just for western Cuba, but as this moves towards Florida. And we know there are still the efforts with the condo building, and this rain is coming. If you look at the next 48 hours here, it does hug a little bit closer to the western coast of the peninsula of Florida, but still pushing rain and strong winds as well. Really concerned there before it does move as it's getting in towards the southeastern U.S. and then coming up the seaboard. It will be kicking out to sea, however, after that. So we'll keep an eye on that and show you the track. But I want to also keep an eye on the situation that we have here with the heat that is in play. 31 degrees the high from this afternoon, and the current humidex. So not even just just what happened this afternoon. I'm talking right now, it feels like 41 degrees. So we do know that there's some active weather. We've been seeing this throughout the afternoon and now here into the evening hours. The areas in red here, severe thunderstorm warning. So heavy downpours, some small hail certainly possible, lots of lightning strikes, and then some strong gusty winds. So kind of tagging towards the north of the city. We have seen some of those extend down towards Richmond Hill and through Vaughan and Newmarket and those regions. Otherwise, it's more north from there. So we may see through the overnight hours a few of these rolling through. They won't be as strong, but still, don't be surprised if you hear the rumble of thunder through the overnight hours. Then as we go through Tuesday, we do have to deal with the heat. A few isolated storms will pop up, not as active as today, but do know that it's going to be Tuesday night that a cold front is going to come through, and it's going to change the air for Wednesday and Thursday dramatically, like a 10-degree temperature difference, but the humidity going down as well. Tonight, hot and humid. These are overnight lows. We're talking about almost mid-20s here. Tomorrow up to 32, feeling like 40. That's why that heat warning continues. Then it will be dropped as we go into Wednesday and Thursday and see the cooler and some wet weather as well before improving towards the end of the week and into the weekend there, Dwight.
Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
Game, set, match, Shapovalov. It's an emphatic finish.
Richmond Hill's Denis Shapovalov has advanced to the quarterfinals of Wimbledon today. The 10th-ranked player beat Roberto Bautista Agut in straight sets. He will play in the round of 8 for the very first time, and he isn't the only Canadian to reach that level.
No, he has it. Now he can celebrate.
Montreal's Felix Auger-Aliassime beat 4th seed Alexander Zverev of Germany. It took 4 hours and 5 sets, but the 20-year-old battled through, calling it the victory of his life. It is the first time ever 2 Canadian men have reached the single quarterfinals of Wimbledon. The British government has outlined a plan to ease COVID-19 restrictions 2 weeks from now. It would shift the onus of public safety from government-mandated rules to what Boris Johnson calls personal responsibility. But the growing threat from the highly transmissible Delta variant has health experts worried about relaxing rules too soon. Tessa Arcilia reports.
After 4 weeks of delay, Freedom Day, as it has been known here, is just around the corner. It is still set for the 19th of July. Now, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson made the much-anticipated announcement on what life will look like if the final phase of this roadmap out of the lockdown does happen. So some of the details include no more limits on social contacts, allowing people to gather in groups of any size, as well as no more social distancing rule of 1 meter apart, except in specific places like airports. All businesses, including nightclubs, will be allowed to reopen, and there will be no more requirement of wearing face masks in shops or on public transports. These are some of the things that Boris Johnson announced, and he said what it was an exercise in trying to balance very different risks.
The risks of the disease, which the vaccines have reduced but very far from eliminated, and the risks of continuing with legally enforced restrictions that inevitably take their toll on people's lives and livelihoods, on people's health and mental health.
But some scientists and medical experts are worried that England is reopening a little too soon, especially in light of rising infections. In the last 7 days alone, the UK has seen a rise of 70% in infections and 24% in hospitalizations. Now, there are people who are calling for a delay in reopening, and Boris Johnson said if we don't open now or within the next few weeks, it will be more difficult as winter is just around the corner as well. Now, he was keen to stress that vaccinations have weakened the link between infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. As it stands now, 86% of UK adults have received their first dose of the vaccine, and 64% are fully vaccinated. Now, the final decision on whether July the 19th will remain Freedom Day will be made in a week's time. Tessa Arcilia, CBC News, London.
As we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX closed up by 55 points. The Dow also up by 152. Our dollar traded higher at 81.02 cents US. Stay with us. We'll be right back. More than 25 million people in Canada have now had at least one jab of protection against COVID-19, but children under 12 are not among them because they are still not eligible to get an approved vaccine. That leaves the road ahead uncertain for parents and families, even as the world begins to recover from the pandemic. Vicadopia reports.
Here we go.
It's been a rough ride for little Ted's parents in the UK. His dad, a Canadian, has been anxious for his son to visit his grandparents back in Ontario.
Sorry, excuse me. When we got notification, my wife and I got notification that we were receiving our vaccinations, I cried because it just opened the door of being able to see my family again.
But Boggs still worries because Ted is too young to be vaccinated, and he's unsure of the risk to his own mother, who isn't in perfect health.
For both my dad and my mom, the first thing they're going to want to do is hug them, so we're just going to have to try to manage those situations as best we can.
New national health guidance recommends vaccinated and unvaccinated people can gather indoors together in small groups without masks, but still warns those who are immunocompromised should be careful.
Kids will be protected indirectly by having the adults in their world protected. So, for example, they can safely see grandparents who have had both doses of their vaccine because their grandparents are protected anyway.
As this theater camp prepares to open its doors, a priority is assuring parents their unvaccinated children will have minimal close contact with others.
Each camper gets their own, so we've got 1,500 of these.
But with school out and kids already mingling, hospitals across Canada are now seeing common colds, coughs, and respiratory infections as worried parents bring their kids in to get checked out.
It's not a reason to keep them away from camp or to keep them away from socialization. These are things we know how to deal with. These are complications we know how to deal with. So I'm not worried, but I just do warn people that these viruses are on the rise.
Back in England and planning his trip to Canada, Andrew Boggs vows he'll take every precaution to protect his parents. Vicadopia, CBC News, Toronto.
Hi there. Wedding season is in full swing in Canada, but for better or worse, COVID-19 restrictions are keeping celebrations small. That has the wedding industry wondering about its future. Will big weddings return, or are micro ceremonies here to stay? Jacqueline Hansen has the story.
This is where Lisiane Morris planned to marry her Canadian fiancé, a castle back home in France.
It's a tradition. It just makes it more fancy and more magical.
But the prospect of saying her vows in front of 120 family and friends was stressful. So when the pandemic put a halt on international travel, Morris was actually relieved.
This was a perfect opportunity for us to have an excuse not to do it in a big way.
This was Plan B, a wedding on a local farm in British Columbia with just 4 guests.
I'm really grateful that COVID has opened people's eyes to how incredibly amazing small weddings can be.
In Toronto, the founder of the Pop-Up Chapel Co. says demand for small ceremonies more special than City Hall for less money than a traditional wedding was already growing before COVID, and now it's ramping up even more.
This year, we should marry over 150 couples in our chapels across Canada, and I'm just ready to get the ball rolling and to do events again.
For others, small services have been more of a survival strategy.
Most venues and vendors have come up with new packages that they never had before.
But for an industry hard hit, going from 120-person weddings like this to this means earning far less money on food and drinks.
We're allowing for smaller weddings because it's the only thing that couples have the option to do. But in the future, we do need to see bigger weddings in order for the business to continue.
This wedding planner was supposed to do 47 weddings in 2020. Instead, just 8 small ceremonies went ahead.
Our wedding industry definitely took a really big hit, specifically the South Asian wedding industry, because, we never even heard about the term micro wedding.
She expects large multi-day celebrations to return next year.
All the weddings that we have for 2022 are at least, if not more, 250 people and above.
When all options, big and small, can be on the table. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
I love that line from the wedding planner, and I've been to a lot of South Asian weddings. They said there's no micro weddings in South Asian. wedding. But somebody else is getting married this weekend. But we don't want to spill all the beans, or this summer, I should say. But we don't want to spill all the beans out there. Put that out there.
Yeah,
what are we talking about, folks?
You know, planning a wedding during a pandemic isn't impossible, but whatever is right below impossible is just about where it's at. That's where those micro weddings come in. I feel for a lot of people I've encountered or vendors that I've talked to planning my wedding, for people who were supposed to get married last year and then they had to punt it to this year and now they're having to do that again. So for the industry, for everyone, it is complicated. So just got to be happy, I guess, that you're in love and hope you can have your family. Or Dwight's going to be walking me down the aisle, I'll tell you that. So it's going to be happening. Tonight, 23 degrees. That's what we're looking at. A few isolated thunderstorms. They're not isolated what's happening in cottage country right now. So we still have the active weather there that I was telling you about. And for tomorrow, heat warning continues, 32 degrees. It will feel like we're at about 40. Yes, that will be our Humidex again. We're there right now. And then we see changes. If you're looking for that to feel a little more comfortable, it comes with some showers, but a cold front goes through tomorrow night, and that will change the air mass altogether and bring in more comfortable air, Dwight.
I'll have my dancing shoes on that night, not my walking shoes, so I know your dad's going to handle that, but I'll be dancing. Thank you, Colette.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it.
That is our show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. We will see you back here tomorrow at 6. Have a great night.